The Climax. Life was pretty good for a while after that. Mother worked part-time in the store in Escalante until she was quite far along with Clem. "Feels good to have a pair of shoes that fit me," Lottie said, gazing happily at them. "And a nice dress," Merle chimed in. "Me too," Lorene said. "And candy. I love candy," as she stuck her thumb in her mouth. "I guess it was worth all the time on the homestead," Mother said. "We're finally getting on our feet." "I guess so," Father replied, his thoughts seeming to be otherwise engaged. Not long after, while I was lying on top of the quilt in the other room trying to go to sleep, I heard Mother and Father talking at the kitchen table. "Found a buyer for the sheep," Father said. "How much?" Mother asked happily. "About $1,700, Father replied. "Thought I'd get a car to haul supplies from the railroad in Marysville to Escalante. We can improve supplies in the store and finally live like real home folk," Mother's voice bubbling out of her excitedly. I went to sleep contentedly that night. But that life my mother imagined was not to be. It seemed like nights brought nightmares. Many quarrels erupted in the tiny kitchen of our home after my parents thought I was asleep. "How could you hire her?" Mother's voice tumbled out of her mouth. "She's a good worker," my father replied defensively. "Her mother's pushing her on you," Mother whispered, sad words. "Vilda's a pretty teenager with a crush on you." "That's not true," Father's words rang falsely even to me. "She's so young. She just turned 16 in April. She deserved better than you. Don't ruin her and our lives." Mother wept quietly. "I'm hiring her," Father said gruffly, "and that's that." And I heard him walk out the door. What will become of us? Mother's words fell on my broken heart like boulders off a cliff, and I too wondered what was to become of us. A note. Clem Marlin Barney was born 30th of May, 1926, on a Sunday. The moon was a waning gibbous. His birthstone is the emerald. He was born on Decoration Day, now known as Memorial Day. The whole town was whispering and gossiping about my father and Vilda. "I went into the store for some peppermint," they said, "and they were lollygagging around. Afton told me to get out of there." "Seems like the whole town knows," I said, hanging my head down. "A lot of people won't go in there anymore. I'm afraid to, even when Mother sends me for something. I peek in the window till I know it's safe. I know Mother won't step foot in there." "She should," they said. "She's not doing anything wrong. It's my brother who's wrong. My folks won't speak to him anymore." "I had Willard Barton move a bed in the back room of the store," Father said one day. "Why would you do that?" Mother asked, a puzzled look on her face. "I don't want anyone breaking in at night and stealing anything," was Father's angry reply. "They never have before. Why would they start now?" Mother probed. Father hefted some of his clothes into a couple of vegetable crates. "I'm moving down to the store for now, just to make sure," he said. "That's sad," Lorene said as a tear ran down her face and her thumb went into her mouth. "It's cold out there and it's snowing," Merle chimed in her bewilderment. Lottie held Clem close, as if to protect him from the calamity that was thrown in our family like a heavy, wet, mildewed blanket. I just stood there, realizing that Lottie and I'd need to do all we could to help our little family and keep it together. Mother's shoulders sank as a sob escaped her throat. She held Freeland closer as she closed the door behind our unfaithful, conniving father. I had heard of three-ring circuses, and as time went by, to me we appeared to be in the middle of one. Our lives unraveled. The townspeople watched my father and Vilda, and my mother and grandmother Barney were in cahoots watching them too. And me? Well, I was watching all of them. I was the little pig with big ears, a quiet, shadowy spy, the fly on the wall wherever I was, whenever my family's name was mentioned. One such day, my mother and grandmother left the younger kids with the older aunts and set off for an afternoon of peeking through windows and eavesdropping on Vilda's mother's house. I followed like a lone coyote, stealthily shifting from bush to bush to follow them. I almost gasped out loud when my mother darted from her lookout point into the kitchen and came out with a heaping picnic basket full of goodies, and a picnic blanket to boot. I followed as the two of them scurried to an out-of-the-way gully where no one would see them. Mother giggled like a schoolgirl as she spread the bright red and blue blanket on the sandy embankment. "This picnic is fit for a queen," Grandmother said, as she placed canned meats and fancy breads and all sorts of goodies out to eat. Mother agreed. "Better us eating them than them. This is the first time I've felt anywhere near like a queen for some times." My mouth watered as I watched them enjoy the luscious meal, but I stayed clear of their party. They deserved to have it to themselves, after stealing it from right underneath Vilda and my dad's noses. "We'll bury all this," Grandmother said as she stood up and stretched her cramped legs. "Don't want Afton to get wind of our shenanigans." "Basket and all?" Mother asked. "It's a crying shame to throw away such a nice blanket. And these leather gloves from Afton must have cost a mint." She held them up admiringly. "I got the right place for them," Grandmother said, "under my mattress where no one would think to look." And with that said, they dug a hole and tossed in all the evidence. Not long after Mother and Grandmother had disappeared over the crest of the hill, I dashed to the hidden accumulation and quickly dug up the remains of their loot. I found morsels of uneaten goodies that were well worth the digging, and I ate what I wanted. I dug a bit deeper and reburied it all, covered it with extra rocks and such to keep the cache well hidden. Well, that's that, I thought, as I walked contentedly home. But it wasn't. The three-ring circus continued, and the town continued to gossip. One day a strange lady dropped by to see my mother. Mother knew who she was. She was the mother of Vilda's old boyfriend. I'd just unloaded an armful of wood for the stove when she knocked, so I slipped to the floor, waiting for possible fireworks. "Lily," said the lady, "Afton was down to my place accusing my boy of all sorts of mischief." "What mischief?" Mother asked innocently, her stern face belying a twinkle in her eyes. "He blamed my boy for stealing a picnic basket full of food and a blanket from Vilda's mother's place." "A picnic basket from Miss Farmer's place," Mother replied, her facial expression not changing. "Good for him. Tell me, did he do it?" "No, he didn't do it. Afton tore into my son like a madman, but I stood between them so he wouldn't beat him up," the lady said. I bent my head, covering my mouth to keep from hee-hawing out loud. "So, somebody took Afton and Vilda's lunch, and no one knows who did it," Mother said. "That's funny. If I knew who it was, I'd congratulate him." "I wish I knew who it was," the lady replied. "My son shouldn't have to take the blame for something like that." "I agree," Mother replied, and she offered the lady a cup of coffee from the pot that always simmered on the stove. The lady declined and went on her way. Mother sighed with relief. She poured herself a much-needed cup of coffee and collapsed into a chair at the table. I merrily skipped out of the house to finish my chores. I laughed frequently at the untold secret I shared with my mother and my grandmother. I remember Mother passing out from pure exhaustion. Lottie and I dragged her across the floor. We fanned her till she woke up long enough for us to get her into bed. She would do countless batches of wash from daylight into the evenings, mostly on the washboard, for townspeople who were willing to pay her. During that time, electricity was brought into the Escalante Valley, just for the evenings, mind you. Around this time, Mother ordered what she called a wonderful contraption of a washing machine. She used it to wash and wring clothes through each evening until the electricity was shut down. One afternoon, I stopped short at the doorway of our home in Escalante as I heard my mother's voice. I wasn't sure who she was talking with, but I could tell she was upset. "I just don't know what to do anymore. All these kids running around, and so's Afton, only he's running—" and her voice trailed off despairingly. That's because he's got that poor girl pregnant, Grandfather said. She doesn't know any better, but he does. It was Grandfather she'd been talking with. I haven't seen her for some time, Mother said. He had her hiding out at Mrs. Farmer's, Grandmother injected. I could hear the grandmother was in there with him, too. Susan Heaps delivered it. Said it was a full-grown baby, Grandfather said. Poor girl. It didn't live, Grandmother said, and I heard her sniff. I figured she was crying. I slipped away then and took a now well-traveled path to Mrs. Farmer's to do a little spying. As much time as I spent being the little pig with big ears, listening to every stray bit of information I could, I was amazed that my ears weren't dragging on the ground. I found a tearful Vilda. My father had his arm tightly around her. Mrs. Farmer was a few feet behind them, unloading a homemade wooden casket. And they were burying a tiny infant just outside the cemetery fence. In later years, Gladys, my half-sister, tried to find the grave. I looked too, but to no avail. Sometimes we were invited to eat at my grandparents'. One day, after a luscious meal, Vay and I were hanging out on the ground, playing Purg by the porch. Listen, Vay said. Father's mad. My ears perked up, and we scurried to listen by the propped-open door. He should be hog-tied and horse-whipped, Grandfather exploded. I don't know how he got a divorce, Mother said, forlornly. Afton said he'd get one way or another, but I don't know how he got it. So once again he's lied himself out of an ugly situation, Grandmother replied, her shoulders sagging. They sure did ruin my children's lives. And mine, Mother pined gloomily. Afton's gone out of business. He claims it's been going downhill for months. He's stashed the money somewhere, or he's making 2 sets of books, Grandfather said. Something's haywire. I hear tell he's moving her to Richfield. You've worked for years to establish yourself. It's not right, Grandmother agreed. Something wasn't right, for sure. I watched Mother working her fingers to the bone to keep life and limb together for our growing hungry family. She trudged through knee-deep snow to the well to haul water. She warmed the wash water on the stove to keep the water hot. We children did what we could, realizing at times the wood we brought in would keep us from freezing to death at night. I no longer had the privilege of going to school. Everything was ruined. And yet, Father had had the money to move Vilda to Richfield. One day Vay came on horseback to our house. Get on, he said. Your father's in town. He's sporting a brand new car. Really? I said. What? Mother yelled, and she ran out of the house, hearing the ruckus. He can't buy a new car and leave us starving to death. Soon most of the people in town, including Mother and me and my siblings, were gazing at Afton. Afton. I no longer called him my father. He was showing off his newfangled ride. You left us to starve, Mother shrieked at him. You should be horsewhipped and hog-tied. Several people agreed, some with a few choice words that I won't repeat. Suddenly, I heard a big booming voice from some distance, high up above where we stood. It was my great-uncle Royal Barney. Hold him tight, boys, he said to some men. Hold him down. I've a well-earned surprise for him. What's going on? Grandfather asked, just arriving at the scene. Everyone better steer free and clear, Royal hooted gruffly. The men and I rolled out a shocker for him. Looking up above us, I saw there, sitting on a ledge, was a very large boulder. Great-uncle Royal and the other men gave it a shove, and I gasped as I saw what they had in mind. Their aim was true, and their major rock landed square in the middle of Afton's shiny new black car. In the background, I heard a blood-curdling yell, No! It was Afton, of course. Mother laughed. Some of the townspeople clapped, and others just stared in amazement. I stood there, my mouth gaping open in shock. You better close your mouth, Roy, before you catch a mouthful of flies, Grandfather said. Let's get a closer look at the calamity. Shame to ruin such a gorgeous car, they said. But that wasn't the end of it. Soon Royal and a large group of men surrounded Afton, and Royal asked the crowd, "What do you think he deserves to happen to him? Hog tying? Horse whipping? Throw him in the pig pen where he might make a tasty meal for the hogs? Strap him down in a red ant bed? Or should we tar, feather him?" "Let him go," Mother said. "If I can take the car and fix it up, I can sell it and get back on my feet." "Oh, Lily," Grandfather exclaimed sadly, "the car's no more paid for than that washing machine you're paying for on time." "But what if they kill him?" Mother exclaimed dejectedly. "We can't stop what's been brewing for a long time," said Grandfather sadly. "Sometimes people just have to get their comeuppance." "Oh, no!" Mother screamed, running after the mob-like group. "Stop, Lily!" Grandfather hollered in a stern voice. "Take the children home. They don't need to see this. Neither do you." Mother's face reflected all our fears as she turned us around to trudge forlornly home, obeying my very wise Grandfather Barney. I watched over my shoulder in sheer terror as Grandfather ran after them. And by the way, Afton lived.